Hello, welcome to this Substance Designer tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to make a generator, a pattern generator for use in Substance Painter. So what we can do is just to start off, I want some outputs defined for me because it will save time. So I'm going to use a new Substance graph and I'm going to go to Painter, Filter, Specific, and then just up here we'll call it Scales. There we go, 2048, 2048, relative to parent, etc. All good stuff. And click OK. And now I've got my outputs. So I've got my colour, roughness, metallic, and height. I may not use all of those. But we also have some inputs, and these are coming from Substance Painter. But I'm not going to use these, so I'm going to delete them out. There we go. Okay. So first thing to do is I'm going to double click on my blank area of the graph, and then under type I'm going to change it from filter to texture generator, so that when we output it, it will know this is a generator and it will act accordingly. Okay, so for scales then we need some shapes first. We need to make a scale shape, and I'm just going to make kind of a box with a a hemisphere or hemicircle on the bottom, a semicircle. So we'll start off by pressing the space bar and typing shape and adding that to our graph. So this one is the square, and I'm going to want another one which is a circle. So let's press Control and D, and that will duplicate that. So me going off and finding it again, and in the properties I'll change its pattern to a disc. There we go, now we have a disc. Okay, so I want to add these two together, but I only really want this box part on the top of the graph, or the top of the of that circle. So what we'll do is we'll add a transform. So space and type in trans and pick transform 2D. And now I'm going to move, connect those two together with the noodle, and on the transform 2D view I'm going to move it up. So we'll use the X offset, the Y offset, to move that upwards. Now it doesn't look any different now, but that's because we have tiling on, and the tiling is just, as the shape moves off the bottom or off the top of the graph, or top of the node, it's coming in on the bottom, so it looks no difference. We just have to adjust that. So on tiling mode here, we click and go absolute. Its default is relative to parent, so whatever parent is plugged into it, it will tile in exactly the same way. But when we go to absolute, we can control it, and I want no tiling. So now it's moved off the top and it's just cutting off, which is perfect, because now we want to blend these together. We want to add these two shapes together. So it's space and type in blend, and then I can put them into the foreground and background inputs, and then on the blending mode we'll set that to add, and now we've got like a scale shape. Now I don't want it to fill the full kind of area here. I want it to be a little bit smaller, so I'm just going to put another transform 2D node and connect that up, and then we'll adjust it a little bit. So if I say type in 95 for the width and 95 for the height, you'll see we're still tiling, so I need to change my tiling mode to absolute and turn off tiling, and now we've got a little bit of space around the edge of our piece. Okay, so that's great. That's our first kind of shape, and if I right click on that, I want where's the add frame? It's here somewhere. There we go. So I'll just add a frame to that, and we'll call that frame base shape. Okay, so before we go into tiling this, we're going to tile it, and we're going to overlap it with copies of itself. We need to add some difference in grey in here, because if I just add white to white and black to black, I'm just going to end up with white or black. So you won't be able to see the pattern that we're forming. It will just, you know, look like a big white block. So what we'll do next is use some gradients to start to form the overlapping shadow of our scales. Okay, so we'll do that in the next bit, and I'll talk to you then. Okay, so for our shading on this, I want to shade the top and I want to shade one side, because I want our kind of scales to overlap both vertically and along the side. So what we need for that is a gradient, and if I press space and type in gradient, whoops, I want the linear gradient one here, because it's going white at the top, black to the bottom. There we go. And I just want to rotate this round, because I want the dark area to appear on the top of our tile there. So in the rotation angle, I'll set that to 180. And now I can blend these two together. So space, add a blend node, put that one in the background and that one in the foreground. It doesn't really matter in this particular instance, because we are going to be using a multiply, and something multiplied by something else doesn't matter which order you do it in, it's going to be the same. So let's set that to multiply, and now I've got a nice shaded bit as if something is coming over the top of our little scale here. Okay, so as well as this side or this shading, I want some shading off to one side, because I want it to underlap, if you like. So if I take this gradient, I can drag out that noodle and let go, and I want to transform here, and this transform is simply going to rotate 90 degrees, possibly more, possibly the wrong way. So it's 90. Yes, I want 270. Whoops, not 2000 or 27,000. There we go. So I've got the dark side, you know, on the left, and you know, I want to apply that to this shape here. So again, it's a blend, and this time I'm going to reverse the order of these, and I have a reason for that, which I'll show in just a second. So let me set it to multiply. Now this is darkening up a little bit too much, so what I want to do is just reduce my opacity. Now you'll see as I'm reducing my opacity, I'm verging towards the gradient and not the shape, and that is not what I want. So if I select these two noodles and press X, it will switch them round, and now when I adjust my opacity, it will tend to the shape and not the gradient. So I can be quite, you know, precise about where that is. There we go. So now we have a nicely shaded piece, and what we can do now is put these into a tile. So let me just add a frame to this. So add frame, and I'll just call this shading. There we go. And then we'll drag those and move them backwards. Okay, so in the next one then, we're going to use the tile sampler node, because it has a kind of special ability that the tile generator doesn't have. So I will talk to you then. Okay, so if you press the space bar and type in tile, we want the tile sampler, not the tile generator. So I'll click there, and now in here we're going to input our pattern into pattern 1, There we go, the pattern 1 input, and then with the sampler selected we will change the input mode to pattern input. There we go. And now we have a whole bunch of scales, but they're not overlapping, you know, they're just scales in you know, in isolation. So what we need to do here is just adjust our sizes, and this is kind of the special thing that we can do here and we can't do elsewhere. We can overblow the size of our individual inputs. So for example, if I just turn it up, you'll see that we get this kind of scaled pattern, and you know, that's kind of good, but it's a little bit much. If I set it to 1, it's a little bit better, but what I actually want to do is have it more than 1, so 1.25, and now they're starting to overlap themselves, perhaps even 1.5, and it's starting to overlap even more. As you can see, our shading is kind of giving it the effect of, you know, having them overlapping instead of simply just being the shapes. I'll show you what I mean so it's not quite as abstract as my description. So if I plug that straight into there without that shading, you don't see anything because it's all white or it's all black, and it's just going to you know, blow itself out. So let's put that in there. And what else can we do? Well, we can nip down the bottom, and for our colour we have some options for the mix type. So we've got add sub or max. Max seems to be the better option because if you add sub you get this weird kind of intersecting pattern which doesn't look anything like we want it to. So let me put that back to max. There we go. Okay, so that's our tile sampler, and we've got our basic pattern, but we probably want to do a few, you know, little tweaks to it just to make it a little bit more interesting. So we'll do that in the next section. Okay, so before I just fiddle with that sampler, I'm just going to plug that into the base color channel and we'll see what we get. And yeah, it's looking pretty good. Let's also, no, let's leave it as it is for the moment. Okay, so on the tile generator, you know, we can put all sorts of bits and bobs in it in terms of randomness. So if I close up all these, so in pattern for example, we could actually create a second pattern whereby, you know, we can alternate which scale is shown. To do that, you increase the pattern number, and then I'll just use our white one here as an example and plug that in. And obviously it's, you know, not very good in this instance, but it's putting those white patterns alternately across the whole thing. As a slightly better demonstration, let's do that. Need to delete that noodle. There we go. I'm going to copy this whole section here with Control and D. Put that down there. And this time, let me just double click on these to improve them. Oh, I've moved that down as well, and I didn't mean to. Oh no, it's all gone wrong. I've lost almost entire account of what was happening there. So let's Control D that. No, that just does the shape. Alright, I'll stop blathering and just do it right this time. So what we can do is create a new version of this shape and then put it through a similar setup to this. So this shape, for example, I could make it bigger or smaller, or I could rotate it, or I could do almost anything. So let's grab this output and drag it down here to a transform. and this one I'm going to make a little higher. So, you know, I'm going to have a little kind of variation in height for my nodes. So these ones then, oops, let's grab these. Can I grab them all at once? Yes. And Control D. I'll pop that down there and switch this input in instead. There we go. And then I'll plug that into number 2. And now if I double click on there, we've got a little bit of variation. I could, you know, change these gradients a little bit. For example, if I turn the tiling, whoops, that's not tiling. If I turn the tiling mode off, take it to absolute and have it as no tiling, I can then change this. Oh, it is still tiling. Of course it is. That would be too useful otherwise. Sorry, I'm messing up here. I do apologise. Let's put that back to relative. What I actually need to do is to put a transform in here. So select the noodle, put a transform in, and now I can offset it in Y. So I could move it lower or I could move it higher. I'm going to move it a little bit lower and then turn the tiling mode off. There we go. So I've got extra black at the top, which is feeding into my gradient quite nicely, but that will be having an effect on, you know, where these are positioned. So now, as you can see, some of these scales that are raised up are, you know, a little darker. So you could put multiple shapes in there. You know, obviously, you know, the more you put in, the more complicated it's going to be. But you know, sometimes a little bit of complication, you know, adds to your texture. So let's make sure I've got all of these in this frame, because that's all part of the shading as well. There we go. So what else can we do here? We can, almost invalidating my original thing, is we can change our scale. So I can put a scale in and it will scale and scale and scale as we did earlier. We can do some random scaling. So for example, I could randomly scale it in X or randomly scale it in Y, and you know, we'll get a little bit of, you know, variation, or quite a lot. What else have we got? We have our position, and this is a useful one. So we want an offset. So if I offset everything, global offset, it would just shift it one way or the other. But if I use the individual offset, it's going to offset each row independently. So the first row it won't offset, the second row it will, and the third it won't, and the fourth it will. So now we're getting kind of overlapping scales, and you know, they're offset in that particular way. If I take this scale off, because that was not quite right, that's better. I'd gone a bit too big there, I think. Now we get our individual scales. There we go. What else could we do? We could do all sorts. So that was position. We have rotation. So we can have a random rotation, or we can just rotate them. For example, I could just rotate them all in the same direction. I could do them all by, say, 45 degrees, and I would get the pattern pointing in a slightly different way. Let's set that to 0. Or I could put a random rotation on. Now, with the random rotation on, you might be better off going for a smaller value, because, you know, as the shapes go out of line, the maths starts to, you know, become a little bit confused, and you start getting blocks where you don't want them. Okay, so let's take that down to a really small number. There we go. And colour. Colour's a useful one. because we can either use a mask, so we can turn up that threshold there, we can use a mask input, we can mask random ones out and you'll get gaps, but we can also just add a little colour randomness, and this will lighten or darken tiles, you know, the further you go up. So it's kind of a raggedy scales, whereas down here it's just quite a nice variation difference. There we go. Okay, so let's build up the other bits. We'll do that in the next one. I don't think I'm going to use roughness or metallic. I'm going to do that perhaps using Substance Painter rather than Designer, but I do want height. So we'll set up height next, and then we'll export and use it in Painter. Okay, so let's just pop that up there, and then I'll plug that in. And I'm not sure this is the best kind of viewing thing here. Let's just move this up and change this to a rounded cylinder. There we go. Okay, so we've got a height on, but we're not really seeing it. There's a little bit there, but not an awful lot. So I need to go to Materials, Default, and Edit, and then scroll down to our height area, and I'm going to increase the tessellation, and that will make a finer, much finer mesh, and therefore the displacement will be more accurate. And I'll increase the height scale so that we can actually see it doing what it's doing. So I hope you can see that, especially around these edges. You can see that it's actually you know, pushing the mesh out according to our scale pattern. Okay, that's pretty much it on that one. We can change the height level. The height level is sort of by default at 0.5, which is a mid-grey, but I could get it to push everything out by taking that down to black, and that gives us a slightly different, instead of displacing in and out, it's just displacing out, and that might depend upon your target engine, whether it has a kind of a fixed way of doing it. I know some say, well, okay, 0 level is grey or 0 level is black, or, you know, some programs are like that. Other programs you can change it, you know, you can set it in a parameter. Okay, so I believe that's that for this. What we need to do now is export this, and we'll do that in the next section. Okay, so last thing we need to do is just save this file. So I'm just going to hit save. Now I've saved it once already, so let's do File Save As and overwrite my original, and that's that. Nothing very exciting there. And then we right click and publish SBSAR, and again hit the Generate Missing Icons button. This is going to go in the same file, same locations as I saved the SBS, and I'll click publish, and yes, because I've already saved it once. Right, so now we can use it in Substance Painter. So first thing I need to do is drag and drop my SBSAR onto my library. It's procedural, it knows it is, we told it earlier in the tutorial, and I'll add that to my library and import. And that should import it and highlight it. See, I've done it once already, but now I've got 2 copies. So what we can do now is add this to a material. So I'm going to start by just putting the height in. So I'll add a new layer, take color, rough, metal, and normal off, and I'll just drag and drop my scales there into my normal. All this is way off, so let's go to our tessellation settings. I'm going to up my subdivision count to get a nice look. I'm going to reduce my height to a more sensible height, and there we have it. a reasonably nice kind of scaly material. It's a bit chunky. Can I go smaller than that? There we go. Yes, is the answer to that question. Might even want to go a bit smaller than that as well. There we go. Okay, so that's our height map done, and all it really takes now is a question of, you know, building up a texture. So we can add a new layer, for example, and we could add a metal to that. So if I go into my materials library and find a steel or an iron, let's try powdered iron. There we go. So now I've got lovely metal scales. We could right click here and add an anchor point, and then above this we'll say we'll use rust material. Not rust, fine's what I want. And then we'll add a black mask and a generator. Which generator should we use? Well, we use a dirt generator. There we go. And if I go down to the bottom, go to my micro height, anchor points, my fill layer, switch that over to the height channel, and we should get something out of that. Let's have a look at the mask, see what's going on. Oh, it's a horrible lot of repeating. Let's take the grunge scale down. There we go, we'll have a bit more detail in that now. And I realise that I haven't enabled the micro height. So go into micro details. Oh dear. Activate micro height. And there you can see that's picking up those edges. Oh, I've gone all choky. I can adjust my AO depths, or radius rather, and the depth. There we go. And now if we go back to the material, we're getting a lot more rust around those edges. There we go. So that's generating a scale pattern. And then just a quick bit on you know, using it in Substance Painter to get some sort of result. You'll notice, I'm sure, that some of my scales are overlapping others. That's probably on my rotation, that I've rotated somewhat that I shouldn't, or rotated too far. Might be even on my scale, so just be aware of that. Don't do it too far. Don't go to two extremes and expect it to keep working. There will be, you know, some oddities like this that you'll pick up. So I hope you found that useful, and I hope my squeaky strange voice at the end there didn't cause too much of an issue. And I hope to talk to you in another tutorial.